The night was heavy with rain. Thick clouds blanketed the sky, swallowing the moon and stars whole, leaving the city drowned in shadows. The streets glistened with water, every streetlight casting a trembling reflection on the soaked asphalt. Mr. Raymond's sleek black car cut through the storm like a silent beast, its headlights piercing the darkness. He had just finished another long meeting with investors, his mind weighed down by figures, contracts, and deadlines. For years he had lived this way, numbers and profits, meetings and deals. That was his life, a life of discipline, of wealth, of control. Yet on that particular night, fate had decided to place something in his path, something he could never have expected. As his car turned onto a quiet road, Raymond noticed something unusual in the distance. At first, he thought it was just the flicker of a faulty streetlight. But as he drew closer, his eyes narrowed. Beneath the weak glow of a broken lamp, 4 small figures huddled together, shivering against the cold rain. They sat on the edge of the sidewalk, their clothes damp and torn, their hair plastered to their pale faces. For a moment, Raymond thought they were just poor children, maybe strays with nowhere to go. That sight alone might have been enough to stir pity in any passerby. But then, as the beam of his headlights washed over them, he froze. His grip on the steering wheel tightened until his knuckles turned white. His heart gave a violent jolt in his chest. The faces of the children, they were faces he knew, not strangers, not random children. But his own face, the same sharp jawline, the same wide, searching eyes. Even the crooked smile that used to light up his own childhood photographs, there it was, staring back at him in the form of these strange children. Raymond's breath caught in his throat. He blinked hard, rubbed his eyes, even shook his head slightly as though trying to clear a fog from his mind. No, this can't be real, he told himself. I've been working too long. I must be imagining this. But when his gaze returned to them, the children hadn't vanished. They were still there, their eyes fixed on him, not moving, not speaking, just watching. Something about their stillness unnerved him. Children were rarely this quiet, this motionless. Yet these 4 drenched in the storm seemed frozen, like statues carved out of the very shadows. Raymond's car rolled to a slow stop a few feet away. The engine's low growl was the only sound in the silence, apart from the drumming rain. His chest rose and fell quickly as a strange, unshakable feeling crept through him, something between fear and recognition. He switched off the headlights, and in that moment, the street grew darker. The broken lamp above flickering weakly as if it, too, were struggling to hold on. The children did not flinch. They remained huddled together, their thin arms wrapped around one another, as if protecting themselves from something unseen. Yet their eyes never left him. Raymond sat frozen behind the wheel, his mind racing. Why do they look like me? Who are they? The rain hit harder now, splattering across the windshield, each drop sounding like a drumbeat of tension. The businessman's thoughts spiraled. Could they be actors? Some cruel prank? Or was there something else at play? Something he couldn't explain with logic or reason? Finally, he could no longer bear the weight of his own curiosity. He pushed the door open, stepping out into the storm. The icy rain stung his skin immediately, soaking his tailored suit within seconds. His polished shoes splashed into a puddle, but he hardly noticed. All he could see were the children. Step by cautious step, he moved closer. His breaths came unevenly, puffing out into the cold air. The eldest child, a boy who looked no older than 12, tightened his hold on the younger ones as Raymond approached. His eyes, sharp and wary, locked on Raymond with a maturity far beyond his years. Eyes that mirrored the same cautious gaze Raymond once carried as a boy. Raymond stopped a few feet away. He opened his mouth, trying to speak, but the words caught in his throat. For a moment, the only sounds were the rain and the faint buzz of the dying streetlight. Then finally, in a hoarse voice, he whispered, Who are you?" The children did not answer. The youngest, a little girl with wet curls sticking to her cheeks, buried her face into the shoulder of one of the boys. The eldest simply stared, his lips pressed tight as though guarding a secret too heavy to share. Raymond's pulse quickened. His rational mind fought desperately for an explanation, but the sight before him defied logic. Each detail, the curve of their brows, the shape of their noses, reflected pieces of himself. It was like looking at fragments of his past, scattered into 4 fragile forms. The silence stretched on, thick and suffocating. The rain poured harder, as though the heavens themselves wanted to wash away the truth that was slowly unraveling. Raymond's body trembled, not from the cold, but from the storm raging inside him. He took another step forward, his shoes splashing again. Still, the children did not move. They only stared, and in their eyes he saw something that shook him even more than their resemblance. He saw pain. He saw hunger. He saw loneliness, the kind he had once known too well. His throat tightened. Memories from his own childhood flashed before him. Nights of emptiness, the chill of hunger, the ache of being invisible. He had buried those memories deep beneath his empire of wealth. Yet now, staring into these 4 pairs of eyes, the memories clawed their way back. He felt as though the past had returned, not to haunt him, but to demand something of him. The children's silent stares seemed to whisper a question he could not yet understand. Raymond's heart pounded violently as realization gripped him. This was no accident. Somehow, someway, these children were connected to him, and his life, built on wealth and power, was about to unravel in ways he never imagined. The storm raged on, but inside him, a darker storm had already begun. The storm continued to pour down in sheets, the wind carrying the sharp scent of wet asphalt and rust. Mr. Raymond stood only a few feet away from the children now, his expensive suit clinging to his skin like a second layer. The rain had undone his usual aura of control. No longer the polished, untouchable millionaire, he looked like a man stripped bare by the elements. The eldest boy shifted slightly, his thin arm wrapping tighter around the little girl who clung to him. His eyes remained locked on Raymond, unblinking, cold with suspicion. He was only a child, yet the weight in his stare could rival any grown man's. It was a look Raymond knew all too well, the look of someone who had learned early that the world was not safe. Raymond cleared his throat, trying again to speak. "Are you lost?" His voice cracked with both nerves and the bite of the cold. The children didn't answer. "Where are your parents?" he asked, softer this time, almost pleading. The question seemed to ripple through the group. The youngest whimpered faintly, her tiny shoulders shaking. One of the middle boys, perhaps 8 or 9, shifted closer to his older brother, his hand gripping his sleeve as if begging for protection. Still, no answer came. Raymond felt his chest tighten. He had faced boardrooms filled with ruthless businessmen. He had stood against competitors who would do anything to see him fail. Yet standing here before these silent children, he felt utterly powerless. The silence grew unbearable. His heart hammered in his ears. He glanced around the street, empty, drenched, deserted. Not a single car, not a single passerby. Just him, the storm, and these children who looked like him. Finally, the eldest boy spoke. His voice was low, almost swallowed by the rain. We don't have anyone." The words pierced through Raymond like a blade. He blinked, stunned. "No one?" The boy shook his head once, firmly. His jaw tightened, as though holding back the flood of emotions that threatened to escape. Raymond's breath caught in his throat. Something inside him twisted. He wanted to ask more questions. Where they came from. Why they were here. But something about the way the boy stood, protecting the others, told him not to push too hard. Instead, he knelt slowly, lowering himself to their level, despite the rain soaking him to the bone. "It's all right," he said gently. "You don't need to be afraid." The little girl peeked at him from behind her brother's shoulder. Her eyes were wide, glistening with tears. For a second, Raymond saw himself sitting alone in the cold, watching the world pass by, wishing someone would reach out. He swallowed hard. "You must be freezing." "Come with me," he urged. "I'll take you somewhere warm. You can have food. Dry clothes?" The offer hung in the air like a fragile thread. The eldest boy narrowed his eyes, his body stiff with doubt. "Why?" he asked flatly. "Why would you help us?" The question stung. Raymond hesitated, unsure how to answer. He couldn't tell them the truth, not yet. He couldn't tell them that their faces haunted him, that every glance at them felt like staring into a mirror from the past. So he said the only thing that came honestly, "Because no child should be out here in the rain alone." The boy studied him, searching his expression for cracks, for lies. His protective stance never wavered, but his eyes flickered with something, hope maybe, or exhaustion. Finally, he turned to the others. "What do you think?" The middle boy whispered, "I'm hungry." The little girl's voice was even smaller. "I'm cold." The eldest exhaled, his shoulders sagging under the weight of responsibility too great for someone his age. Slowly he gave a small nod. Raymond felt a rush of relief. "Good," he said softly, rising to his feet. "My car is just over there. Come on." But the children didn't move right away. The rain followed them all the way back, hammering on the roof of the car like a restless drum. Inside, the atmosphere was heavy, the silence broken only by the rhythmic swish of the wipers across the windshield. Mr. Raymond gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles pale. Every so often, he glanced into the rearview mirror. There they were, 4 children pressed close together in the back seat, dripping water onto the fine leather, their wide eyes darting around as if the car itself were some alien world. He could feel their unease. The youngest girl clung to her brother's arm, her tiny hands trembling. The middle 2 sat stiffly, whispering to one another in voices too soft to hear. The eldest stared out the window, his jaw tight, refusing to let his guard down. Raymond's chest ached. "What am I doing?" he asked himself. He wasn't the type to invite strangers into his life, let alone children. His world was one of contracts and calculations, not late-night rescues. Yet here he was, driving 4 mysterious children who looked like him, straight to his home. The thought made his stomach twist. But every time he considered pulling over, every time he thought about leaving them somewhere safe and walking away, he looked into those mirrors again and saw something he could not ignore. Their eyes, his own eyes, staring back at him. The mansion loomed in the distance as the car turned into the private drive. Iron gates parted slowly, as if reluctant to reveal what lay beyond. The long path to the estate glistened with rainwater, flanked by towering trees that bent under the storm. At the end stood Raymond's home, a sprawling mansion of stone and glass, glowing faintly with warm lights that cut through the gloom. The children leaned forward in awe, their little faces pressed to the windows, drinking in the sight. For them it was a palace, something out of a fairy tale. For Raymond it was simply a house, a place filled with silence and emptiness. As the car rolled to a stop in front of the grand entrance, servants rushed out with umbrellas. Their expressions shifted the moment they saw the back seat. Whispers broke out instantly. "Children! Where did they come from?" "Good heavens, sir, they look—" Raymond silenced them with a sharp look. "Get blankets, towels, and food, now." The servants scurried away, leaving the children staring nervously at the massive wooden doors. The eldest boy's hand tightened on the handle, ready to protect his siblings if needed. Raymond opened the back door himself. "Come on," he said gently, offering his hand. The little girl hesitated, but slowly reached out, her tiny fingers cold and fragile in his. She climbed out first, her brothers following close behind. Their small shoes splashed in the puddles as they stood before the mansion's towering entrance. Inside, the air was warm, scented faintly of polished wood and fresh flowers. The golden chandelier cast a glow over the marble floor, its light bouncing across grand staircases and ornate paintings. The children froze. Their eyes widened as they took in the luxury. It was more than they had ever seen. Too much, almost overwhelming. Raymond noticed their hesitation. He crouched slightly, speaking softly. "It's all right. You're safe here," the eldest boy frowned. "Why are you doing this? People don't just help like this." The words hit Raymond harder than he expected. They carried the bitterness of experience, the kind only children abandoned by the world could know. He wanted to answer, but what could he say? That he didn't know why, that he was drawn to them by a force he couldn't explain, that their faces had awakened something inside him he thought long dead. Instead, he simply said, "Because I should." The boy didn't reply, but he didn't resist either. Slowly, he guided his siblings inside. Servants appeared with thick towels and warm blankets, wrapping the children one by one. Their small bodies disappeared under the fabric, shivering less as heat finally reached their skin. A tray of steaming soup and bread was carried out and placed before them at the long dining table. At first, the children hesitated. They looked at the food with suspicion, as though it might vanish if they reached for it. Then the middle boy, unable to resist the smell, picked up a piece of bread and took a cautious bite. The moment the taste hit his tongue, his eyes softened. He devoured the rest hungrily. The others followed, and soon the sound of spoons against bowls filled the dining hall. Raymond watched from a distance. His heart ached at the sight. Children so hungry they ate as though afraid someone might take it away. It stirred memories he had long buried, nights when he too had gone to bed on an empty stomach, when survival meant clinging to scraps. His chest tightened. He turned away, running a hand over his face. He was a man who had built empires, who commanded respect in every room he entered. Yet here, watching 4 children eat, he felt powerless, raw, and strangely human. A voice broke through his thoughts. "Sir." It was his butler, an elderly man who had served him for decades. His eyes flicked toward the children, then back to Raymond. He lowered his voice. "Forgive me, but don't you see it? They look exactly like you." The words made Raymond stiffen. He had been trying not to acknowledge it out loud, but hearing someone else say it chilled him to the bone. His gaze drifted back to the table. 4 children, 4 mirrors of his younger self. And for the first time, the thought that had been clawing at the edges of his mind all evening settled fully into place. What if they're not just strangers? The question burned in him, one he wasn't ready to face yet. But deep down, he knew the truth would not stay hidden for long. The mansion had grown strangely quiet after the children had eaten. Their bowls were emptied, the bread basket bare. The little girl had fallen asleep, curled up on one of the plush couches, her damp curls resting against a pillow much too fine for her small, fragile frame. The other 3 sat close by, their eyes heavy, their bodies weighed down with exhaustion, yet none of them willing to truly close their eyes. They didn't trust this new world of chandeliers and marble floors, not yet. Mr. Raymond lingered near the tall windows of the drawing room, staring out into the storm. His reflection stared back at him in the glass, but it wasn't just his own face he saw. Behind his image, in the dim light of the room, were 4 children who wore his features as though nature had played a cruel trick. He felt a heaviness in his chest, something he couldn't explain. A fear he hadn't known since his younger years. "Sir," came the low voice of his butler from the doorway, "shall I prepare rooms for them?" Raymond didn't turn. His gaze was still locked on the glass. "Yes," he said quietly. "But first I want someone to find out who they are." The butler's eyes flickered. He nodded slowly. "Very well. I'll contact the investigator." 2 days later, the storm had passed, but the mansion remained clouded with questions. Raymond had kept the children under his roof, feeding them, giving them clean clothes, but their presence unsettled him more with each passing hour. Their laughter, faint and hesitant, sometimes echoed down the halls, and each time it did, a strange pang twisted inside him, part nostalgia, part dread. That afternoon, his private investigator arrived, a stern man with graying hair and eyes that had seen too much. He was efficient, discreet, and had handled many delicate matters for Raymond in the past. They sat across from each other in the study, a fire crackling low between them. The investigator placed a thin folder on the desk, his expression unreadable. "You asked me to look into the children," he said, his tone clipped. "I did." Raymond's pulse quickened. His hand hovered over the folder but didn't open it yet. "And?" The investigator leaned back, folding his arms. "The children's names are Daniel, Michael, Rose, and Lily. Ages 12, 9, 7, and 5. They were found wandering the outskirts of the city, trying to survive after their mother passed away 3 weeks ago." Raymond's chest tightened. "Their mother?" The man nodded. "She was a woman named Eliza." The name hit Raymond like a stone. His breath caught, his grip on the armrest tightening. Eliza, a name buried deep in his past. A face he hadn't allowed himself to remember in years. The investigator continued, his voice steady. "She worked at one of your factories years ago. According to some of her old friends, she left suddenly after an incident. They say she never spoke of it clearly, but she lived the rest of her life in poverty, struggling always with those children at her side." Raymond's throat grew dry. He forced the words out. "Are you telling me?" The man gave him a long look. "That woman knew you well, sir. Very well, more than an employer should have. And those children." He paused, tapping the folder lightly. "Their resemblance to you isn't coincidence." Raymond's heart pounded violently. He opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were photographs, grainy but clear enough. A woman with tired eyes and a gentle smile. Eliza. Standing with the 4 children, her hands resting protectively on their shoulders. He flipped to the next page. Records of her employment at his company. Notes of her leaving abruptly. And then, nothing. A life of hardship, unrecorded, unremarked. Until now, the room felt colder, the fire's warmth meaningless against the chill in his bones. Memories surged unbidden, late nights in his youth, laughter shared with a woman who had believed in him before the world had, a promise he had once made and broken when ambition pulled him away. The investigator spoke again, his tone low. "It seems, sir, that you may have children you never knew about. Or perhaps ones you chose to forget." Raymond slammed the folder shut, his face pale. "That's enough." The man didn't argue. That night the mansion was quiet, but inside Mr. Raymond's heart, a storm raged louder than the one that had soaked the children days earlier. He sat alone in his study, the folder from the investigator lying unopened on the desk. He didn't need to read it again. Every word had already been carved into his mind. The children weren't just strangers. They weren't just orphans he had taken pity on. They were his blood, his past made flesh, his forgotten promises reborn. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, but even the sharp burn of the drink couldn't drown the guilt clawing at his chest. He rose and walked to the tall window, staring out at the moonlit garden. There they were, 4 small figures curled up under blankets on the cushioned benches near the fireplace in the drawing room. The servants had offered them bedrooms, but the children had chosen to sleep together in one space, clinging to each other even in comfort. Raymond's eyes softened. He saw their tiny chests rise and fall in rhythm, their faces peaceful for the first time since he'd met them. But peace for them meant unrest for him. He could not stop the memories that came flooding back. He saw Eliza's smile, the way she had once laughed with him when he was young, reckless, and still dreaming of riches. She had been different from the shallow faces that surrounded him later. She had cared for the man he was, not the man he would become. And what had he done? He had walked away. He had traded her kindness for ambition, for boardrooms and contracts and wealth that filled his pockets but emptied his soul. Now her children, their children, were here, alone, hungry, afraid, carrying his features like a cruel reminder of the man he had once been. Raymond pressed a hand to his chest, feeling the weight of years. He had spent his life building towers of glass and steel, only to discover that the foundation beneath him was rotting with regret. He whispered to himself, his voice cracking in the silence. "What have I done?" The next morning the mansion was filled with faint sounds, laughter echoing down the hall, the clatter of spoons against bowls. The children were eating breakfast, their little voices carrying through the grand house. Raymond stood in the doorway of the dining room, watching unseen. Rose, the 7-year-old, was giggling as Michael pretended to balance a piece of toast on his nose. Daniel, the eldest, scolded them gently, though the faint curve of his lips betrayed his amusement. Little Lily clapped her hands, her curls bouncing as she laughed with pure delight. It was such a simple scene, so ordinary, yet it pierced Raymond's heart. He had everything money could buy, artwork, cars, estates across the world, yet none of it had ever filled the emptiness inside him. And here, in the laughter of 4 children who looked like him, he felt something stir that had been long buried, belonging, but the guilt was stronger. He couldn't shake the thought. They grew up in pain because of me. He clenched his fists. If he had been there, if he hadn't abandoned Eliza, if he had given them even a fraction of his fortune, their lives would have been different. No hunger, no nights on the streets, no loneliness under a broken streetlight, and Eliza, perhaps she would still be alive. The thought nearly crushed him. He stumbled back into the hall, gripping the wall as his breath came shallow. His eyes burned. For years he had prided himself on being a man of steel, unbreakable, untouchable. But now guilt cracked him open, leaving him raw and human. Later that day, Daniel found him in the study. The boy's eyes were cautious, but his voice was steady. "Why are you helping us?" he asked. Raymond froze. The question again. The same one from the rainy night. He opened his mouth but couldn't find the words. How could he tell this boy the truth? That he wasn't helping out of charity but out of guilt? That he wasn't a savior, but the very reason they had suffered? Daniel's gaze didn't waver. "People don't help for free," he said quietly. "We've learned that." The boy's words cut deep. Raymond's throat tightened. He stopped, lowering his eyes. "Maybe I'm trying to fix something I broke a long time ago." Daniel tilted his head, confused. But before he could ask more, Lily's small voice called from the hall. And he left. Raymond sank into his chair, burying his face in his hands. Coward, he thought. You can face the world, but not your own children. That night, Raymond sat awake, staring at the ceiling. Every tick of the clock echoed like judgment. He couldn't keep this secret forever. Sooner or later, the truth would come out. And when it did, would they hate him? Would they turn away? Just as he had once turned away from Eliza? The thought of losing them, of watching them disappear from his life, terrified him more than any failed deal or financial loss ever had. For the first time in his life, Mr. Raymond, the millionaire who seemed to have everything, realized he was standing at a crossroads. One path meant silence, denial, continuing his life of wealth while keeping the children at a distance. The other path meant confession, responsibility, and change. It meant admitting that for all his riches, he had been poor in the ways that truly mattered, and as he lay in the darkness, guilt weighing heavier than gold, he knew the truth. His empire was worthless if he lost them. The mansion was quiet that evening, but it was not the kind of quiet that soothed. It was heavy, pressing against the walls, sinking into the air like a secret waiting to be spoken. Mr. Raymond sat in the study once more, the fire burning low, its orange glow flickering against his weary face. For days he had carried the truth inside him, the weight of it gnawing at his heart, hollowing him out. He could no longer look at the children without feeling the sharp sting of guilt. Daniel, Michael, Rose, Lily. 4 names, 4 faces that mirrored his own. He knew he couldn't delay any longer. The truth had to be told, no matter how much it tore him apart. With a deep breath, he rose from his chair and walked slowly toward the drawing room where the children were gathered. They were sitting together on the rug, surrounded by puzzles and books the servants had given them. Lily was humming softly. Michael was trying to build a tower with blocks. Rose clapped whenever it stood upright, and Daniel, ever watchful, kept one eye on his siblings and the other on the door. When Raymond entered, their chatter quieted. 4 sets of eyes turned to him. He felt their weight like a spotlight. "Children," he began, his voice trembling, "I need to tell you something." They exchanged glances. Even Lily, small and innocent, stopped humming. Raymond sat down slowly, lowering himself so he was at their level. The firelight danced across his face, highlighting the cracks in his carefully built armor. For the first time, he did not look like a man of wealth and power. He looked like a man stripped bare. He took a breath, his voice low. "I knew your mother." The words fell into the silence like stones into still water. The ripples spread across their faces. Surprise, confusion, cautious curiosity. Daniel's brow furrowed. "You knew her?" "Yes," Raymond whispered. His throat tightened, but he forced himself to continue. "Her name was Eliza. She was important to me once. Very important." Michael tilted his head, his young eyes narrowing. "What do you mean?" Raymond's chest ached. He looked at them each in turn, their eyes, his eyes searching him for answers. He swallowed hard. "What I mean is, I wasn't just someone she knew. I cared for her deeply. And when I was young, before I had all this..." He gestured faintly at the grand room around them. "She and I shared something. Something real. Something I should never have walked away from." Rose's lips parted slightly, her small voice trembling. "You left her?" The guilt in those 3 words struck harder than any blade. Raymond bowed his head. "Yes, I left her. I chose money, work, ambition, and I abandoned her when she needed me most." His voice cracked thick with remorse. "I thought I was chasing success. But all I did was run from love, from responsibility." The room grew unbearably still. Finally Daniel spoke, his tone sharp. "And us?" His voice wavered, but his eyes burned. "What about us?" Raymond looked at him, tears threatening to spill. You are mine." The silence shattered. Rose gasped softly. Michael froze mid-breath and Lily blinked in confusion, clutching her brother's arm. But Daniel's face hardened. "You're saying, you're our father?" Raymond's eyes glistened. He nodded slowly. "Yes, I am." The words seemed to echo in the room, settling over them like a heavy blanket. Daniel's hands balled into fists. "You weren't there," he said fiercely. "You weren't there when Mom cried at night. You weren't there when we were hungry, when we had nowhere to go. You weren't there when she..." His voice broke. He bit his lip, choking back tears. "When she died." Each word pierced Raymond deeper than the last. He reached out instinctively, but Daniel pulled back, his face wet with silent fury. "I know," Raymond whispered. His voice was ragged, his heart breaking. "I know I wasn't there, and I can never take back those years. I failed you. I failed her. I failed all of you." The younger children's eyes shimmered with tears. Rose pressed her small hands to her mouth. Michael stared blankly, as if struggling to understand, and Lily let out a tiny sob, burying her face in Daniel's side. Raymond's own tears spilled freely now. "I cannot change the past," he said, his voice shaking. "But I can change now. I want to change now. If you'll let me, I want to be here for you. To give you the love, the safety, the life you should have had from the beginning." The room was filled with the sound of soft crying, Rose's muffled sobs, Lily's tiny whimpers, even Michael's sniffles. Daniel remained silent, his jaw clenched, his eyes red. The days that followed were unlike anything the children had ever known. For the first time in their young lives, Daniel, Michael, Rose, and Lily woke to the sound of birds singing, instead of the cold wind rattling broken windows. They ate meals that were warm, filling and plentiful instead of scraps gathered from bins. Their laughter began to echo through the long marble halls of the mansion, giving the grand house a heartbeat it had never known before. But beneath the joy, there remained a shadow. The wound of the past did not vanish overnight. Daniel especially remained cautious. He watched Mr. Raymond carefully, his guard still raised. Trust was not something easily given by a boy who had grown up too fast, who had been forced to act like a father long before he should have. Yet slowly, even Daniel began to notice something. Raymond was different. Every morning, the man who once lived for nothing but meetings and money now sat with the children at breakfast, listening to their chatter with genuine interest. He asked about their dreams, their fears, their favorite games. He laughed at Michael's jokes, applauded Rose's drawings, and carried Lily on his shoulders when her tiny legs grew tired. He was present, not just in body, but in spirit. And for the children, that meant more than all the riches in the world. One evening, a week after his confession, Raymond gathered the children in the living room. The fire burned warmly, casting a golden glow over the room. He looked nervous, almost like the same uncertain man who had pulled over that rainy night. His voice, though soft, carried a weight of sincerity. "There's something I want to ask you," he said, glancing at Daniel, then at the younger three. "I know I can never erase the past. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness so easily. But I want to spend the rest of my life trying to be the father I should have been." The children looked at him silently. Rose's eyes sparkled with tears. Michael clutched his sleeve, Lily tilted her head curiously. Daniel's face remained unreadable. Raymond took a deep breath. "I want to adopt you officially. Not just as an act of duty, but because you are my children, my family. And I want the world to know it." The room went still. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Then Rose gasped, covering her mouth. Michael's eyes widened. Lily clapped her tiny hands without fully understanding, her curls bouncing as she giggled, but all eyes turned to Daniel. The eldest boy stared at Raymond, his lips pressed tightly together, his young face torn with conflict. He remembered every hardship, every hunger, every lonely night. But he also remembered the way Raymond had cried when he confessed, the way he had held them all as if they were his lifeline. And in his heart, Daniel realized something. For the first time, they weren't alone. Slowly, Daniel nodded. His voice was quiet but firm. "Yes." Raymond's eyes filled with tears. He bent down and pulled them all close, his arms wrapping around them as though he would never let go again. The adoption process was swift. Raymond's wealth and influence made sure of that. But this time it wasn't about money or power. It was about love, healing, and a man finally choosing what mattered most. When the papers were signed, Raymond looked at each of the children with tears shining in his eyes. "From today forward, we are family. And I promise you this, I will never leave you again." Rose threw her arms around him. Michael grinned proudly. Lily giggled, and even Daniel, though quiet, allowed a faint smile to touch his lips. Months passed. The mansion, once cold and lifeless, became a home. Toys littered the once pristine hallways. Children's laughter echoed through every room, and the air carried the warmth of something no amount of money could buy. Love. Raymond himself changed. He no longer spent endless hours buried in contracts and deals. Instead, He spent his evenings reading bedtime stories, attending school plays, and learning how to braid Rose's hair, though he never quite got it right. He was awkward at times, clumsy even, but the children loved him for it. The man who once lived for wealth now lived for moments, small, ordinary, precious moments that meant everything. And though the guilt of the past never fully disappeared, it transformed into something else, a reminder of what truly mattered, and a vow never to repeat the same mistakes. One sunny afternoon, Raymond sat in the garden, watching Lily chase butterflies while Rose painted nearby. Michael tried to climb a tree, and Daniel, though pretending to read, kept a careful eye on his siblings. Raymond leaned back in his chair, a peaceful smile spreading across his face. For the first time in decades, he felt whole. The man who had once built towers of glass and steel had finally discovered the one foundation that could never crumble. Family. He whispered softly to himself, his eyes misty but full of gratitude. I thought I had everything, but only now. Now I truly do. And as laughter filled the garden, Mr. Raymond realized that what had begun as a haunting encounter on a rainy night had turned into the greatest gift of his life. Spring had arrived, and with it, the garden around the mansion bloomed in colors Raymond had never stopped to notice before. Flowers stretched toward the sun, birds chirped in the trees, and the once quiet home was now alive with children's voices, music, and laughter. A year had passed since that rainy night. Daniel was taller now, his shoulders broader. He no longer looked like a boy guarding his siblings with suspicion. He was still protective, but lighter, freer, a teenager allowed to smile. Michael had discovered a love for drawing blueprints of toy cars. Rose filled the house with her paintings, and Lily, with her endless energy, had become the heart of every room she entered. Raymond sat on a bench beneath the oak tree watching them play. His business phone buzzed in his pocket, but he ignored it. These days, he always ignored it when the children were near. The man who once ran after every deal now ran after laughter, after memories, after love. The children noticed the change too. They no longer flinched when the rain fell or when the nights grew long. They had a home. They had safety. Most importantly, they had a father who loved them fiercely, even if he had arrived late one evening. As the sun set in golden streaks across the sky, Daniel walked over to Raymond, who was fixing the fence. You know, Daniel said, his voice steady, I used to think I hated you. Raymond froze, the hammer in his hand pausing mid-air. Slowly he looked at his son. Daniel shrugged, a faint smile tugging at his lips. But I don't, not anymore, Mum. She always said people can change if they want to. And you did. Raymond's eyes grew misty. He set the hammer down and pulled Daniel into an embrace. The boy stiffened for a moment, then allowed himself to sink into it. For Raymond, it was more valuable than any fortune he had ever earned. Later that night, as the children gathered around the dining table, Rose proudly held up a drawing she had made. It was a simple picture, crayon on paper, a tall man with silver hair and 4 smiling children holding his hands. Above it she had written in uneven letters, Our family. Raymond's heart swelled. He framed that drawing and placed it in his study, replacing the awards and certificates that once defined him. The mansion no longer stood as a monument to wealth. It had become a home built on second chances, forgiveness and love, and in the quiet moments, when Raymond thought back to that night under the broken streetlight, he realized something. The encounter that had once shaken him to his core was not a curse. It was a gift. The children hadn't just reminded him of his past, they had saved his future. As the seasons turned, so did Raymond's heart. From a man of riches to a father of 4, he finally understood the greatest truth of all. Family was the only treasure worth holding on to, and this time, he would never let it go.